My name is Hilda, and I am 58 years old. I raised my only son, Marcus, for 32 years. I did it alone. Every scraped knee, every school project, every sleepless night when he was sick. I was there. So when he looked me in the eyes at that dinner table and told me his mother-in-law was more of a mom than I ever was, I did not scream. I did not cry. I just nodded, picked up my purse, and walked out. 2 weeks later, my phone rang at 2 a.m. Before I share what happened next, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if stories about family forgiveness and finding your strength speak to you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Now let me take you back to where it all began. I met Marcus's father, David, when I was 24 years old. I was working at an insurance company in Columbus, Ohio, filing paperwork and answering phones. It was not glamorous work, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of independence that I valued deeply. David was a sales representative who came into our office one rainy Tuesday afternoon. He had this smile that could light up a room and a way of making you feel like you were the only person who mattered when he talked to you. We started dating 3 months after that first meeting. He would bring me coffee in the mornings, leave little notes on my desk, and take me dancing on Friday nights. I fell hard and fast the way young women sometimes do when they have not yet learned that charm can be a mask for something darker. We were married within a year in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with just a few friends as witnesses. My mother was not happy about the rush, but I was too in love to listen to her concerns. Marcus came into the world when I was 26. I remember holding him for the first time, this tiny bundle with David's dark hair and my mother's nose. I promised him in that hospital room that I would give him everything I had. I meant it with every fiber of my being. For those first 2 years, things were good. Not perfect, but good. David worked long hours, and I juggled caring for Marcus with my job at the insurance company. We were building something together, or so I thought. The cracks started showing when Marcus was around 2.5. David began coming home later and later. His explanations grew shorter and more impatient. Business dinners, he would say. Networking events. Client meetings that ran long. I wanted to believe him because the alternative was too painful to consider. I buried my suspicions under dirty diapers and grocery lists and the exhausting routine of raising a toddler while working full-time. The truth came out when Marcus was 3 years old. I found a receipt in David's jacket pocket for a hotel in downtown Columbus. The date was a Wednesday afternoon, a day when he had told me he was visiting a client in Cleveland. I confronted him that night after putting Marcus to bed. He did not even try to deny it. Her name was Carla, he told me. She was younger, without the responsibilities of a child, without the demands of motherhood weighing her down. He said he needed something different. He needed to feel alive again. I remember standing in our kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter to keep myself upright. I asked him, what about Marcus? What about our son? David shrugged and said he would pay child support. He would do the right thing financially. But he could not stay. He did not want to stay. The divorce papers were signed within 2 months. He was generous with the settlement, I will give him that. He paid child support for the first 2 years, then the checks became sporadic, then they stopped altogether. By the time Marcus was 6, David had moved to California with Carla. He sent birthday cards for a few years, then even those stopped coming. So I did what I had to do. I worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. During the day, I stayed at the insurance company, eventually working my way up to a junior claims adjuster position. At night, 3 times a week, I did bookkeeping for a small grocery store owned by a kind old man named Mr. Patterson. He let me bring Marcus with me sometimes, setting him up in the back room with coloring books and snacks while I balanced the ledgers. Those years were a blur of exhaustion and determination. I learned to fix leaky faucets because I could not afford a plumber. I taught myself basic car maintenance from library books so I would not get cheated at the mechanic. I made Marcus's Halloween costumes by hand and baked his birthday cakes from scratch because every dollar saved was a dollar that could go toward his future. I will not pretend it was easy. There were nights when I cried in the shower after Marcus went to bed, nights when the loneliness felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. But every morning, I got up and did it again, because that is what mothers do. Marcus was a good kid, quiet and serious in a way that sometimes worried me. He did not talk much about his feelings, even as a young child. When other kids at school teased him about not having a dad at parents' night, he did not come to me crying. Instead, I found him in his room one evening, sitting on his bed, with his shoulders shaking. I sat outside his door for 2 hours that night, not pushing, just letting him know I was there. Finally, he opened the door and threw his arms around me. He whispered into my shoulder, "Mom, you are enough." I carried those words with me for the next 20 years. I put myself through night school when Marcus was in middle school, earning an associate degree in business administration. It nearly killed me juggling classes with 2 jobs and raising a teenager, but I wanted to show Marcus that education mattered, that we could always improve ourselves no matter our circumstances. When he graduated high school with honors, I was the proudest mother in that auditorium. When he got accepted to Ohio State University to study engineering, I took out loans I could barely afford to help pay his tuition. Every sacrifice felt worth it when I saw him in that cap and gown walking across that stage to collect his diploma. I sat alone in the audience that day, clapping until my palms were red and stinging. There was no one beside me to share the moment. No husband, no parents, since both had passed by then, no siblings, since I was an only child. Just me watching the boy I had raised become a man. I thought that was my greatest accomplishment. I thought nothing could ever take that away from me. After graduation, Marcus landed a job at a construction engineering firm in Cincinnati. It was a good position, with a good salary about 100 miles from Columbus. Far enough that he could not come home for dinner, but close enough for weekend visits. At least that is what we both said when he moved. The first year, he kept his word. He called every Sunday evening, and we would talk for an hour about his work, his apartment, the city. He came home once a month, and I would cook his favorite meals, pot roast, with roasted vegetables, apple pie for dessert. Those weekends felt like treasures to me. Then he met Jessica. He told me about her over the phone one Sunday, about 6 months after he started the job. Her name was Jessica Hartley, he said, and she was a nurse at a hospital near his office. They had met at a coffee shop when they both reached for the last blueberry muffin. He let her have it, and she insisted on buying his coffee to make up for it. It was a cute story, the kind of meet cute you see in romantic movies. I could hear the happiness in his voice, a lightness that had been missing for years. They dated for 8 months before Marcus brought her home to meet me. I remember preparing for that visit like it was a state dinner. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, bought new towels for the bathroom, and spent 2 days perfecting my pot roast. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted Jessica to see that Marcus came from a home filled with love, even if it was a modest home, even if it was just the 2 of us. Jessica was beautiful, I will not deny that. She had long auburn hair and green eyes and a smile that seemed practiced somehow, like she had studied it in a mirror. She was polite to me, complimented the pot roast, and asked questions about Marcus as a child. But there was something in her gaze that felt like assessment, like she was cataloging the old furniture and the small rooms and the worn carpets. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was just being a typical overprotective mother. The meeting with Jessica's family came 3 months later. Marcus drove me down to Cincinnati on a Saturday morning. He seemed nervous in a way I had not seen before, adjusting his collar repeatedly and talking too fast about traffic patterns. When we pulled into the Hartleys' neighborhood, I understood why. The houses were enormous, set back from the road behind manicured lawns and iron gates. They looked like something from a magazine, not like anywhere real people actually lived. The Hartley house was at the end of a cul-de-sac, a sprawling colonial with white columns and a circular driveway. I had brought my homemade apple pie wrapped carefully in my best dish towel. It suddenly seemed pitiful in my hands, a humble offering to people who probably had personal pastry chefs. Jessica's mother answered the door. Her name was Denise, and she was one of those women who seemed to exist in a perpetual state of perfection. Hairstyled just so makeup flawless, wearing a cashmere sweater set that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She smiled when she saw us, but her eyes went to the pie in my hands, and something flickered across her face. Dismissal, maybe. Pity. Oh, how homemade, she said, taking the pie from me with 2 fingers like it might be contaminated. How very thoughtful of you. Jessica's father, Ronald, was in the living room, a tall man with silver hair and the confident posture of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. He owned a chain of car dealerships. I learned 6 locations across Ohio and Kentucky. He shook my hand firmly, but briefly, already turning back to the football game on their enormous television. Their home was filled with photos of vacations and Europe ski trips in Aspen. Jessica and her 2 older brothers in various stages of expensive education. During dinner, the conversation revolved around topics I could not contribute to. Golf handicaps and wine vintages, and a recent renovation to their vacation home in Hilton Head. I sat quietly eating the professionally catered meal, feeling smaller with every passing minute. When I tried to share a story about Marcus's childhood, about the time he built a birdhouse for my birthday, Denise interrupted with a tale about Jessica's brother winning some business award. I watched Marcus throughout the meal. He laughed at Ronald's jokes a beat too quickly. He nodded along to Denise's opinions like they were profound wisdom. He barely looked at me. When I caught his eye, once he gave me a small smile that felt almost apologetic, but he did not reach for my hand, did not include me in the conversation. I felt like a ghost at that table, present, but invisible. On the drive home, I called Marcus to thank him for including me. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mom, the Hartleys are really great people. They have been so welcoming to me." I said I was glad that it was nice to see him so happy. But something twisted in my stomach as I hung up the phone. There was a comparison being made somewhere in his mind, one he was not voicing. I could feel it like a splinter under the skin, small but impossible to ignore. The engagement came 6 months later. Marcus called to tell me on a Tuesday evening, his voice bright with excitement. He had proposed to Jessica at the restaurant where they had their first official date, and she had said yes. I congratulated him, told him I was happy for him, and asked when the wedding would be. "Next September," he said. "The Hartleys are helping us plan everything. Denise has a lot of experience with these things." I offered to help in any way I could. I told him I had saved some money that I could contribute to the costs. Marcus hesitated, then said that was very kind, but the Hartleys had insisted on covering everything. It was their gift to the couple. I asked if there was anything else I could do, anything at all. He said he would let me know. The wedding planning consumed the next 10 months, but I was barely part of it. Denise took charge of everything with military precision, selecting vendors and venues and menus, without consulting me. When I called Marcus to ask about helping with invitations or decorations, he always had the same answer. "Denise has it covered, Mom. She knows what she is doing. Just relax and enjoy being the mother of the groom." I tried. I genuinely tried to relax and enjoy it, but small hurts kept piling up. I learned from Jessica's social media that there had been an engagement party at the Hartley house, an event I was not invited to. I saw photos of Denise and Jessica going wedding dress shopping together, laughing in a bridal boutique, champagne glasses in hand. I had offered to go with them. Jessica had said the appointment was already full. Then came the conversation about the guest list. Marcus called me one evening, his voice careful in a way that told me bad news was coming. "Mom," he said, "the venue can only hold 200 people, and most of them are from Jessica's side. Her family is really big, and there are a lot of business associates Ronald wants to include. So, I need to ask you to keep your list to 5 people. 5 people. I had 12 relatives and close friends. I wanted to invite people who had watched Marcus grow up, who had celebrated his birthdays, and helped me through the hard years." I told him this was difficult, that I had been looking forward to sharing this day with the people who loved him. "I know, Mom," Marcus said, "but it is what it is. The Hartleys are paying for everything. We have to respect their wishes." I said nothing for a long moment. Then I agreed. I chose 5 people, the ones who mattered most, and I let go of the rest. What else could I do? The wedding was held at the country club where Ronald played golf. It was a beautiful venue, all white linens and crystal chandeliers, and views of the manicured greens. I wore a dress I had bought on sale at a department store, the nicest thing I owned. When I arrived, an usher directed me to table 12 near the back of the reception hall, close to the service entrance. Denise was at table 1, right next to the head table, where Marcus and Jessica sat. During the ceremony, I cried. I could not help it. My son was getting married, the boy I had raised alone, who I had fought for and sacrificed for. But the tears were bittersweet, because I already felt like I was losing him to something I could not compete with. The speeches came after dinner. Ronald spoke first, welcoming Marcus into the Hartley family, talking about the wonderful things ahead. Then Denise stood up, glass in hand, and spoke about how happy she was to have Marcus as a son-in-law, how he had become like a son to them over the past months. She went on for 10 minutes, sharing anecdotes about dinners at their house, about trips they had taken together, about the future she envisioned. When Marcus spoke, he thanked Ronald and Denise profusely. He called them his second parents. He said they had shown him what a real family looked like. He spoke about them for nearly 5 minutes. Then, almost as an afterthought, he glanced toward my table in the back and said, "And thank you to my mom for being here tonight." That was it. No mention of the 32 years I had raised him. No acknowledgement of the sacrifices, the 2 jobs, the nights without sleep. Just thank you for being here, like I was a distant cousin who had made the drive down from Cleveland. After the speeches, I watched the dancing from my table. I saw Denise pull Marcus onto the floor for a song, holding him close and whispering something that made him laugh. He looked at her with such warmth, such affection. The way he used to look at me when he was small, before the world taught him to want things I could not give him. I left early that night. I said goodbye to Marcus, hugged him tight, told him I loved him. He hugged me back, but his eyes were already searching the room for Jessica. I drove back to Columbus alone, the radio off, the silence pressing in on me like water. The months after the wedding brought a slow, steady erosion. The weekly phone calls became bi-weekly, then monthly. My texts went unanswered for days at a time. When I called, Marcus was always busy, always rushing off somewhere with Jessica, with the Hartleys, with his new life. I told myself this was normal. Newlyweds needed space to build their own home, their own routines. I did not want to be the clingy mother who could not let go. So, I gave him space. I waited for him to reach out to invite me into his life. The invitations rarely came. That first Thanksgiving after the wedding, I asked Marcus if he and Jessica would like to come to Columbus. I would cook a full turkey dinner, all the trimmings, just like the old days. Marcus said he was sorry, but they were spending Thanksgiving with the Hartleys. Denise had already bought the turkey. I said I understood. Christmas was the same. Easter was the same. Every holiday became an occasion I spent alone in my small house, watching the phone and hoping it would ring. I tried reaching out to Jessica directly, thinking, Maybe I could build a relationship with my daughter-in-law that might bring me closer to my son. I sent her texts asking about her work, congratulating her on a promotion I heard about from Marcus. Her responses were polite but brief. "Thank you, Hilda. That is very kind." Nothing that invited further conversation. 2 years after the wedding, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I drove down to Cincinnati on a Saturday morning without calling ahead. I wanted to surprise Marcus and Jessica to see their new house that I had only seen in photographs. I brought a container of my pot roast, the dish Marcus had loved since childhood. When I pulled into their driveway, I saw Denise's silver Mercedes parked by the garage. My stomach tightened, but I told myself it did not matter. I was Marcus's mother. I had every right to visit my son. Jessica answered the door. She looked surprised to see me, her smile flickering before settling into place. "Hilda," she said. "What a surprise." Inside the scene stopped me cold. Denise was in the kitchen with Jessica, both of them wearing matching aprons, flour dusting the counter. They were baking, Denise guiding Jessica through some family recipe, laughing together over shared jokes. Marcus sat at the kitchen island watching them with contentment on his face. When he saw me, something shifted. His smile faded, replaced by a look of discomfort. "Mom," he said, standing up. "You should have called first." I held out the pot roast like an offering. "I wanted to surprise you," I said. "I made your favorite." Denise glanced at the container in my hands. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "That is so sweet. But Marcus does not eat red meat anymore. Did he not tell you? We have been teaching him about healthy eating. There is so much research about the effects of beef on cardiovascular health." I stood there holding my pot roast, feeling like a fool. "No," I said quietly. "He did not tell me. Marcus would not meet my eyes." "It is a recent change, Mom. I meant to mention it." I looked around the kitchen at this cozy domestic scene I was not part of. Then I looked at the living room, at the photographs covering every wall. There were pictures of Marcus with the Hartleys everywhere. Skiing trips, beach vacations, holiday gatherings. Marcus and Ronald golfing together. Marcus and Denise at some charity event. Marcus and Jessica and her parents in matching Christmas sweaters. I scanned every photo on display. Not a single one included me. Not even a small picture tucked away somewhere. I was completely absent from the visual story of my son's life. I found one photograph of Marcus as a child, a school picture from when he was about 8. It was on a bottom shelf in the corner, almost hidden behind a decorative plant. Like an afterthought. Like something kept out of obligation rather than love. Before I left that day, I asked Marcus to step outside with me. We stood on the porch in the cold November air, and I asked him why he did not call anymore. Why I was not invited to holidays, why I felt like I was disappearing from his life. He sighed, like my questions were exhausting. "Mom, Jessica is close to her family. I have to respect that. Besides, you are always so different. It is hard for you to fit in." "Different how?" I asked. He did not answer. He just looked at his watch and said he needed to go back inside. "Drive safe, Mom." He gave me a quick hug, perfunctory and brief, then went back to the warm kitchen and the family waiting for him there. I learned more over the following months, pieces of information that drifted back to me through mutual acquaintances. A woman I knew from church had a daughter who worked at the same hospital as Jessica. She told me things she had overheard, things Denise said about me when she thought no one important was listening. "That poor boy," Denise reportedly said. Growing up without a father in that shabby little house with a mother who worked 2 jobs and was never home. Is it any wonder he is so eager for a real family? We are giving him everything he never had. The words cut deep because there was a grain of truth in them twisted into something ugly. Yes, I had worked 2 jobs. Yes, our house was modest. Yes, Marcus grew up without a father. But he had not grown up without love. He had not grown up without sacrifice. Everything I did for him. But how do you compete with country club memberships and European vacations? How do you compete with someone who has the time and money to be present in ways you never could? I was so busy surviving that I could not offer my son luxury. And now, he had found someone who could, and she was slowly, methodically erasing me from his life. I did not confront anyone. I did not make a scene. I just kept sending birthday cards and Christmas gifts, kept calling, even when the calls went to voicemail. I told myself that my son would remember eventually. He would remember who was there when it mattered, who held his hand through the hard times, who loved him before anyone else did. 3 years after the wedding, Marcus called with unexpected news. He wanted me to come to Cincinnati for dinner. There was something important to share. My heart lifted for the first time in months. I imagined a reconciliation, a new beginning. Or perhaps Jessica was pregnant and they wanted to tell me in person. I bought a new dress for the occasion, had my hair done, even treated myself to a manicure. I wanted to look my best, to show them that I was still here, still part of this family, whether they acknowledged it or not. The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place where the menus do not have prices, and the waiters speak in hushed tones. When I arrived, I saw that it was not just Marcus and Jessica waiting for me. Ronald and Denise were there too, seated at a large round table, champagne already poured. I should have known then. I should have felt the trap closing around me. But hope makes us blind to warning signs. The announcement came after appetizers. Jessica was indeed pregnant 3 months along. The table erupted in congratulations, glasses raised, toasts made. I smiled and said how happy I was, how excited to become a grandmother. I meant every word. But as the meal continued, Denise began to talk about plans. The baby would spend a lot of time at their house, she explained. They had already prepared a nursery. They had hired a nanny from a premium agency, someone with impeccable credentials. They were looking into the best preschools in Cincinnati, getting the baby's name on waiting lists already. I listened to this, realizing that every decision was being made without me. When I mentioned that I would love to help care for the baby, that I could come down on weekends, or they could bring the child to visit me, Denise cut me off. That is very kind, Hilda, she said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. But Cincinnati is so far from Columbus. 3 hours is a long drive for a baby. And you are still working, are you not? I am sure you are very busy. We would not want to impose on you. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to speak up to include me in these plans for my own grandchild. But he was focused on his plate, cutting his steak into precise squares, avoiding my eyes. Marcus, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my chest. I would love to be part of this baby's life. I am not just any grandparent. I am your mother. The table went quiet. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to dim. And then Marcus looked up, and his eyes were not the eyes of my son. They were cold, distant, appraising. Mom, he said, can we be honest here? He set down his knife and fork with deliberate precision. Denise has been more of a mom to me in these past few years than you ever were my whole life. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt all the air leave my lungs. She taught me what a real family looks like. Marcus continued. She and Ronald, they gave me things you never could. I had a childhood of struggle because you could not provide stability. I never had a father because you chose wrong and could not keep him. Every nice thing I have now is because of this family. So I think it is better if the baby grows up with the Hartleys as the main family. That is just the reality of the situation. 32 years. 32 years of sacrifice, of working myself to exhaustion, of putting his needs before my own in every single decision I made. 32 years of being his mother, his only parent, his entire family. Dismissed in a few sentences over appetizers at a fancy restaurant. I looked at Denise. She had a small smile on her face, satisfied and triumphant. Ronald was studying his wine glass as if it contained something fascinating. Jessica's expression was carefully neutral. I looked back at Marcus, searching his face for some sign of regret, some indication that he did not mean what he had said. But there was nothing. Just that cold assessment, as if he was waiting for me to argue so he could dismiss me further. I did not give him that satisfaction. I understand, I said quietly. My voice did not break. My hands did not shake as I placed my napkin on the table and picked up my purse. I stood up. I pushed in my chair. I walked out of that restaurant without looking back, though I heard Jessica call my name. I did not stop. I could not stop, because if I stopped, I would fall apart, and I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I drove back to Columbus in the dark, 3 hours on the highway, with tears streaming down my face. I cried for the boy I had raised, the boy who used to tell me I was enough. I cried for the man he had become, shaped by people who valued wealth over love. I cried for myself for all the years I had given him, now dismissed as inadequate. When I got home, I did not call anyone. I did not text Marcus to explain, or apologize, or demand an apology. I just sat in my dark kitchen until the sun came up, letting the grief wash over me in waves. The days after that dinner were some of the hardest of my life. I moved through my routine on autopilot, going to work, coming home, eating meals I did not taste. I did not call Marcus. I did not send texts asking him to reconsider. For the first time in 32 years, I stopped reaching out. It was not about punishment or revenge. I had simply realized something important in that restaurant. You cannot force someone to love you. You cannot argue your way into being valued. Marcus had made his choice, and I had to respect it, even though it broke my heart. But respecting his choice did not mean I had to disappear into grief. It meant I finally had permission to put myself first, something I had not done since the day he was born. The first week I called old friends I had neglected during my desperate attempts to stay connected to Marcus. My college roommate Linda was still in Columbus. We met for coffee and talked for 3 hours. She told me about her own struggles with her adult children, about learning to let go while still loving them. She did not offer solutions, just presence. It helped more than I could say. The second week, I joined a book club at the local library. It was something I had wanted to do for years, but never had time for. The group met on Tuesday evenings, a dozen women of various ages, discussing novels over tea and cookies. I felt awkward at first, rusty at social interaction that was not about work or family. But the women welcomed me, and by the end of the second meeting, I had made plans to go to lunch with a woman named Gloria. Gloria was 63, a retired schoolteacher with silver hair and a laugh that filled the room. She was also a mother who had experienced estrangement from her son, though for different reasons. Over sandwiches at a small cafe, she told me about the years of silence, the slow reconciliation, the ongoing work of rebuilding a relationship with an adult child who had hurt her deeply. She said something that stayed with me. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You have been pouring into Marcus for 32 years. It is time to refill yourself. I started small. I bought a journal and began writing in it each night just a few paragraphs about my day, my thoughts, my memories. I wrote about Marcus as a child, about the good times we had shared, about the moments that had made all the sacrifice worthwhile. I was not trying to hold on to the past. I was trying to process it, to understand my own story, separate from my son. I cleaned out Marcus's old room, something I had not been able to do since he moved out. I packed his childhood things into boxes, labeled them carefully, and stored them in the garage. I did not throw anything away, but I reclaimed the space. I turned it into a reading room with a comfortable chair by the window and a small bookshelf for my growing collection of novels. I went through old photo albums and realized that in almost every picture of Marcus's childhood, I was the one behind the camera. I was rarely in the photos because I was always the one taking them, the one orchestrating the moment, the invisible presence making everything happen. I found one picture of the two of us at his high school graduation, taken by a stranger I had asked to help. We were both smiling, his arm around me, proud and happy. I framed that photo and put it on my bedside table. Not because I was living in the past, but because I wanted to remember. I had been a good mother. Not a perfect one, but a good one. No one could take that truth away from me. Exactly 2 weeks after that terrible dinner, I woke to my phone ringing in the darkness. I looked at the clock. It was 2:17 in the morning. Marcus's name was on the screen. My first instinct was not to answer. Let him leave a voicemail, I thought. Let him experience what it feels like to reach out and be ignored. But something in me, some instinct deeper than hurt, made me pick up the phone. "Mom," Marcus said, and his voice was shaking. "I need you." He told me that Jessica had started bleeding that evening. They had rushed to the hospital where doctors determined she was at risk of miscarrying. They were running tests trying to stabilize her, but nothing was certain. Marcus was in the waiting room alone because Ronald and Denise were at their vacation home in Florida and could not get a flight back until the morning. He was crying. My grown son, the man who had told me 2 weeks ago that I was never really his mother, was crying on the phone at 2 in the morning because he was scared and alone. I could have said many things in that moment. I could have reminded him of what he said at dinner. I could have told him to call his real family. I could have let him face this crisis alone, the way he had let me face his rejection alone. But I am not that person. I have never been that person. "I am on my way," I said. I got dressed in the dark, grabbed my keys, and drove through the night. 3 hours on empty highways, the radio off, nothing but my thoughts and the road ahead. I did not know what I would find when I arrived. I did not know if Jessica would be okay, if the baby would survive. I only knew that my son needed me, and that was enough. I arrived at the hospital just after 5 in the morning. The sun was starting to lighten the sky as I walked through the emergency entrance. Marcus was in the waiting room, slumped in a plastic chair, his face pale and drawn. When he saw me, he stood up so fast he nearly knocked over the chair. He crossed the room in 3 steps and threw his arms around me. He held on like he was drowning, and I was the only solid thing in his world. He cried into my shoulder, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. I held him and said nothing. There would be time for words later. In that moment, he just needed his mother. I stayed at the hospital for 3 days. I slept in waiting room chairs, ate cafeteria food, and kept watch while Marcus was with Jessica or speaking with doctors. The news was cautiously optimistic. Jessica's condition had stabilized, and the baby, though still at risk, had a fighting chance. She would need complete bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy, constant monitoring, no stress. I did what I have always done. I took care of things. I brought Marcus clean clothes from his house. I made sure he ate meals even when he said he was not hungry. I talked to the nurses about Jessica's care plan and took notes so Marcus would not have to remember everything himself. I was present in all the ways that mattered. Ronald and Denise arrived on the second day, having caught an early morning flight from Florida. Denise swept into the hospital like she owned it, immediately taking charge of conversations with doctors, making demands about private rooms and specialist consultations. She barely acknowledged me beyond a brief nod. When it became clear that Jessica was going to be okay, Denise turned to me with that practiced smile. "Thank you for coming, Hilda," she said. "But we can take it from here." I am sure you need to get back to Columbus, back to your work. We would not want you to use up all your leave time. I opened my mouth to respond, but Marcus spoke first. Mom is staying? He said. His voice was quiet, but firm. She drove 3 hours in the middle of the night to be here. She has not slept in 2 days. She is staying. Denise's smile flickered, her composure cracking for just a moment. But Marcus held her gaze until she looked away, murmuring something about getting coffee. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. For the first time in years, my son had chosen me. The night before I drove back to Columbus, Marcus and I sat in the hospital cafeteria, 2 cups of bad coffee between us. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the room was mostly empty, except for a few tired nurses on break. It was not a beautiful setting for a reconciliation, but it was honest. Marcus spoke first. I owe you an apology, he said, staring at his coffee. What I said at that dinner was unforgivable. I have been trying to figure out why I said it, and the only answer I have is that I wanted it to be true. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. I wanted to believe that the Hartleys were my real family because that meant I had found what was missing. That meant Dad leaving was not such a big deal because I had a new dad now, a better one. It was easier to believe you had failed me than to admit that I was still that hurt kid who never got over his father walking out. I listened without interrupting. This was his confession to make his truth to speak. Denise, he continued. She made me feel like I belonged to something bigger. All that money, all those vacations, all those connections. I thought that was what family meant. But when Jessica was in danger and I was sitting alone in that waiting room, none of it mattered. The Hartleys were in Florida. You were the one who came. He reached across the table and took my hand. You were always the one who came, he said. Every school play, every baseball game, every time I was sick. You were there. And I threw that away because I was chasing something that was never real. I squeezed his hand, feeling tears prick at my eyes. I told him that I was not a perfect mother. I had made mistakes, had been too tired sometimes, too stressed, too focused on survival to give him the kind of attention Denise could offer. But I had always loved him. That had never wavered, not for a single day. I know, he said. I think I always knew. I just let myself forget. We talked for hours that night, things we should have said years ago, finally finding their way into words. He told me about the emptiness he had carried since childhood, the father-shaped hole that no amount of Hartley hospitality could fill. I told him about the loneliness of raising him alone, the fear that I was not enough, the pride I felt in spite of everything when I watched him become a man. We did not solve everything in one conversation. There was too much history, too much pain on both sides. But we started. We began the slow, difficult work of finding our way back to each other. In the months that followed, things changed. Marcus called more often, real conversations instead of perfunctory check-ins. He started visiting Columbus again, sometimes just for the day, sometimes for a weekend. He set boundaries with the Hartleys, gently but firmly carving out space for me in his life. It was not easy for him. Denise did not accept her diminished role gracefully. There were tensions, arguments, uncomfortable family gatherings. But Marcus held his ground. He told me later that almost losing Jessica and the baby had given him clarity. He understood now what really mattered. Jessica's pregnancy progressed, and in April, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Marcus called me from the delivery room before he called anyone else. Mom, he said, his voice breaking with joy. She is here. She is perfect. They named her Eleanor after my mother. When I held my granddaughter for the first time, I wept openly, not caring who saw. This tiny person was part of me, a thread connecting past and future, proof that love persists even through the darkest times. Marcus made sure I was part of Eleanor's life from the very beginning. I was at the hospital for her birth. I was at her first birthday party, seated at the main table, this time not in the back. I watched her first steps, heard her first words, felt her small arms wrap around my neck in toddler hugs. My relationship with Marcus is not what it once was, but in some ways, it is better. We are honest with each other now in ways we never were before. He understands my sacrifices. I understand his pain. We have both grown through the rupture and the repair. I still think about that dinner sometimes, about the moment my son looked at me and said Denise was more of a mother than I ever was. The memory still hurts. I am not sure it will ever stop hurting completely, but it no longer defines me. It is a wound that has scarred over, a reminder of how close I came to losing him forever. As for Denise, she has learned to share. It was not a gracious surrender. There are still moments of tension, still comments that cut. But Marcus no longer allows her to diminish me. And Eleanor knows both her grandmothers loves both of us in the uncomplicated way that children love. I have continued building the life I started during those 2 weeks of silence. I still go to book club with Gloria and the other women. I have taken up gardening. I travel, sometimes short trips to places I always wanted to see. I am no longer waiting by the phone for my son to call. I am living my own life, and that makes the time we do spend together all the more precious. If you are a mother who has felt unseen, unappreciated, or replaced, I want you to know something. Your love is not measured by how your children treat you. It is measured by how you continue to love them even when it hurts. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give your child is the freedom to make their own mistakes and the grace to welcome them home when they finally understand. I learned that love is not a competition. Denise could give Marcus things I never could, but she could not give him a mother. That role was already filled, had been filled since the day he took his first breath in my arms. He forgot that for a while, but he remembered. And that is the grace that keeps my heart open. So if you are in the middle of your own family struggle, if you feel like you are losing someone you love to forces beyond your control, please hold on. Not with clinging desperation, but with patient faith. Sometimes the people we love have to walk away before they can find their way back. Our job is not to chase them. Our job is to be there when they return. And they do return. In their own time, in their own way, they remember who was there when it mattered. They remember who never stopped loving them, even when they made it impossibly hard. I am Hilda. I am 58 years old. I am a grandmother now, a friend, a woman who has learned to fill her own cup. And I am still always Marcus's mother. That is a title no one can take from me. Not distance, not time, not cruel words spoken in fancy restaurants. It is mine forever. Thank you for listening to my story today. I am curious to hear from you. Have you ever had to let go of someone you love in order to let them grow? How did you find the strength to wait for them to come back? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and let me know. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more stories about family forgiveness and finding your way through the hard times. And share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. You never know who is sitting alone in their kitchen wondering if they are enough. You are enough. You always have been. Thank you for watching, and may you find peace in whatever storms you are weathering. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.